Do you have any expectation of what we're going to see with this 1 year anniversary in Ottawa?
Yes, I do. I think we're already seeing some of it. I don't know how familiar everyone is with like the actual ins and outs of the organizers of the protest and stuff. As far as it seems right now, like there's too much infighting between them because it was going to be in Ottawa and then they're going to move it to Winnipeg, but since they can't get along, it's not going to be in Winnipeg. So now they're organized, like the Coots people are organizing their own anniversary. It's just like trying to book a family reunion with a bunch of people you don't like. I don't
I
think they
see.
have the same like energy and like momentum to coalesce them in the same way. However, that's the positive part. However, I think we're already seeing the consequences of it 1 year later.
It's a wonderful day in the homiehood, a wonderful day for a homie. Won't you be my homie to Taro? Okay, well, let's get started.
Let's do it.
Collin, thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here. I love your stream.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I mean, we've been Twitter mutuals for so long now. It's maybe like even over a year.
I think so at this point. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's nice to finally connect with you. I mean, it's not exactly IRL, but it's closer than we've ever been.
absolutely. And we're getting there step by step. One of these
Yeah.
days, it'll be
One of
dreams of
these
beans or
days.
something.
Oh, yeah,
Peterborough's
for
small
sure.
enough. Yeah.
Exactly. It'll happen naturally. Now I know what your face looks like.
Exactly.
So I'm sure when I see you downtown at some point very soon, I'll be like, "Hey, what's up?"
Hey, how are you?
Yeah. And could you take a moment to introduce yourself to our beautiful audience?
Hi, everybody. I'm Colin. My last name is Chepeka. I know it's a hard one. It's like Pikachu. So now that it's out there, now I can start yelling at everyone if they get it wrong. I'm from Peterborough. I'm a PhD candidate at Queen's University. I use they them pronouns. I'm non-binary. I have a history of activism in Peterborough. I went to did go to Trent University, but before that, I was at Peterborough Collegiate and Vocational School, which was PCVS, which was this really interesting, cool high school that was located downtown, and it was home to a lot of students who felt neglected by a lot of the other schools. So whether if that was socioeconomic class or if you were queer, they had this great arts program. So I got started in activism when they shut that school down, and we put up a big fight to stop that. I got out of activism, went to Trent and I did my bachelor's in philosophy. I continued to do philosophy at my master's in York, in Toronto, and now currently I'm just finishing writing my dissertation at Queen's right now.
Wow. What a resume.
It's the last 5 years. So that's easy.
Yeah. So I want to also apologize for a moment if I've ever misgendered you in the past when I've been covering some of the, I guess you could call it, drama that you've been a part of, and apologies for that. Obviously, it wasn't ill intentioned or anything.
I don't think I would be here if I thought it was ill intentioned, so I'm really, really not worried
Yeah.
about it.
Okay, sure, but it's
I
nice to,
appreciate it. It is nice to get that out there. Yeah, thank you. I
yeah,
really
bring
appreciate it.
things into good faith and good integrity. So apologies for that. Gender is a bitch
Oh yeah.
sometimes. So we all have some learning we can do on that front. And
As a
yeah,
non-binary person, I'm also doing a lot of learning. It's a fun and interesting experience for everyone if you let it.
for sure, for sure. It is fun. It is fun to learn. Some people are resistant to learning, but I think a lot of people are also open to it. I was gonna ask you if it's Colin Chepeka or Chepeka, and I was gonna make the Pikachu joke upon, like, no matter how you answered, I had a Pikachu joke planned, but you already beat me to it.
Stole your thunder without even knowing. I'm so sorry. It's a good joke.
Yeah,
So yeah, it is like Pikachu, much like the Pokemon.
yeah, that is honestly, it's so cute, and
I
it's
love
like
it.
it's so great that you have that.
Yeah, because like I
To
go into a bank, my name is Colin with two L's. So like everyone's like, what? Like, why do you have two L's? And then it's like, so my name's Colin with two L's and my last name is Chepeka. I instantly start spelling it immediately.
Yeah, yeah, to Pikachu. Someone did a little Pikachu emoji in chat as well.
Awesome.
So yeah, so you got involved with activism when PCVS was closing, which actually a lot of rad people I know in Peterborough were kind of part of that because it was a very progressive like school, and there's a lot of artists I think that came out of there. So, can you tell us maybe some more about your history as an activist?
Yeah. I started. Well, I was at PCVS. I think I started in 2009. When I was going into my grade 9 year, and that was the year in Peterborough that they had started talking about closing a school. So I had just started at PCVS, just had started at the integrated arts program, and high school is scary for everyone. But then
Yeah.
I heard that this was going on, and there was public meetings going on. So I started attending some of those public meetings and really getting a grasp of like what the layout was, like what were the issues that they were arguing about. And essentially it came down to enrollment. There's not enough butts and seats, so we got to move some kids around to make sure there's enough butts and seats. And then once I started really paying attention and talking with some of the older students, I really realized that this was more than just like an economic decision, and it became very clear that they were targeting us because it felt like it was an easy decision to make. So I started working with these older students, and I give these older students a lot of credit because they started the activism at PCVS, and I was lucky enough to just be interested and willing enough to jump in. And then eventually, I helped lead what was called Raiders in Action, which was the student-led protest group that we had, and we ran a bunch of different protests. There was this really interesting one, since PCVS was located right downtown Peterborough. We got I think close to 300 students link arms from the doors of PCVS all the way to the downtown businesses. So this really creative, artsy environment. I think our biggest action is when we bussed 400 students from PCVS to Queen's Park to protest outside of the legislature there. And the important thing about
Wow.
that is that that was completely student led. The teachers were told they were not allowed to participate because they have conflicting interests. But so it was a completely student led thing. Myself and a few other students, we made up permission forms. We got 400 permission forms out, 400 permission forms back in. We rented buses and we got them down. And then eventually this all really happened over the course of the year, and it became this really dramatic year where I started getting a lot of media attention because I was kind of the face of the activist movement for a little bit. And then the school eventually closed. I was involved with some of the behind the scenes stuff, in terms of the board level. Like there were transition committees, so talking about how they were going to negotiate the transfer of PCVS students to new schools. So I had to like miss class and go to those and talk to the board about like the impact. So my activism was really well rounded in the sense it wasn't just like holding a sign up and walking down the street. It was a lot of the coordinating and going behind the scenes and trying to work directly with like the person we're antagonistic with to try to negotiate at least some of the goals.
Right. Wow. So that was a huge endeavor at such a young age.
It
And
was.
that was under the Kathleen Wynne Liberal government when all this was happening.
Yes, I believe it was. Yes, yeah, it would have been under Kathleen Wynne. Because when we were there, we did have the NDP critic. When we went to Queen's Park, the NDP critic did come out. I think it was Peter O'Toole or Peter Toole at the time. But yeah, and we did talk to Jeff Leal, who was the member of Parliament for the Liberals at the time. We had a sit down meeting with him, our new mayor.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I ended up getting in touch with a lot of the political levels as well. And then there was like the adult organization in the community was called Peterborough Needs PCVS. They ended up launching an actual legal campaign against the school board and stuff. And I was the student representative on that. So it was this and yeah, it was a liberal government, and it was really the result of Mike Harris's cuts in the 90s
Hmm.
that resulted in like there was X amount of students in Peterborough and there's too many empty seats and we don't have enough money. The issue was is that PCVS had the lowest operating costs and the highest enrollment, and then they sent us to the school with the highest operating costs with the lowest enrollment. So it was very clearly like, let's just put these bums in these seats and then we can get our funding.
I see. I see. Yeah. Well, good on you and all the others for fighting the good fight. I know that is something that has hurt Peterborough in the long term, right? Just in because the downtown presence is not the same as it used to be. So, unfortunately, Peterborough has done a really bad job uh, integrating downtown with young people, and not just PCVS, but also Trent University removing its residences downtown. Fleming is also not doesn't have a downtown presence. So, yeah, I don't know. It's very odd choices that get made. And kudos to you for fighting the good fight. More recently, you were there at the most recent drag story time. Can you tell us a little bit about how your activism manifests now?
Yes. After PCVS, I ran away from activism. I dove headfirst into academia because it was a lot. It was a lot to go through in 1 year for such a young age. But I've always been politically minded. And as an academic, I realized a lot of what I wanted to do as an academic was essentially academic activism. I want to be attacking these structures at a different level instead of on the streets, which I think are equally important. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But over the course of me being away from Peterborough, I noticed that it had become a little bit of a hub for a lot of this activity, especially on the far right with Peterburgers and really becoming really known in the international press, like with the Jagmeet Singh incident as well. It seemed to be becoming this really ugly place. And then I heard about Betty Baker. I had moved back to Peterborough. I heard Betty Baker was doing her drag time story events. I attended the one before that was canceled and didn't take any organizing role at all. I just attended to show up as part of the counter protest just to see, scope it out, see what it was like.
Yeah.
And then after seeing that, after seeing the increasing rage, especially further to the south in the United States, but increasingly here as we're seeing, like the rage, the anger, and the inevitable violence that is going to come from this backlash against trans and queer rights, I decided I do have a little bit of capacity and experience to maybe take a bit more of a leadership role to make sure that Betty and the kids were okay. So before the new year, I sent Betty a message and said, I'm thinking about maybe getting some people together to come out as counter protest. And I just want to let you know, maybe if this is something that you're interested in. And we established a back and forth there. And it eventually led up to me coordinating with some out of town folks who wanted to come in and really help defend the event and show that Peterborough has support from other communities.
Right. And I mean, it felt really good, I think, to have you and the people you helped organize get to Peterborough there at the event. So, can you tell us maybe a little bit about I guess I want to say characters that were there and that like were being counter protested?
Yes, we were definitely aware that like some of the typical Peterborough folk were going to show up. So like
Right.
Crystal Peters and King Nico, they have made Peterborough their launching ground for their quote unquote like citizen journalist careers, which is really what launches a lot of these people into like the far right spotlight. You can see Jordan Peterson as a big
Right.
example of that.
Yeah. And sorry, just to
So
clarify, are they're from Peterborough?
I believe I don't know if they're actually from Peterborough, but they
Yeah.
certainly love to come here to stir up trouble.
Okay.
And I know within Peterborough, I should be very specific. I'm not sure if Crystal and King Nico are from Peterborough, but I do know that Peterborough is home to the Hold Fast movement, which has deep ties to the whole Peterburgers movement and these broader, nefarious actors. So I had
Yeah.
a feeling these Peterborough affiliated folk would come. I had a feeling that some independent media would also show up. And, just with that, that's going to bring police presence in and of itself. And therefore, that's another added risk factor that I wanted to make sure that we were aware of. And our goal was essentially to try to keep everybody safe at the event. And, it went really, really well, in my opinion.
Yeah, fantastic. So, I guess specifically, if you can tell us anything, how did you counter their presence?
Right. So I think the most effective action we took, and I think a lot of people are noticing I'm dancing a little bit around it. I was one of the ones holding the big flag. I was one of the ones holding the big flag, and we used that flag in multiple different ways. So that flag was used to as what has been widely popularized to protect the identities of certain people who showed it up, because as is law, you do, as soon as you enter a public space, you are sacrificing your right to consent because we know the law. However, it's not necessarily the moral thing to do to go to an event like this, where there are people who are going to show up who are from marginalized communities and blast their image all over online. So that's one of the reasons why we use the flag to block. The other ways we use the flag that I don't think have been talked about enough that were really, really effective is that when the Save Canada boys, and for those who don't know who the Save Canada boys are, they're what I like to call the mini MAGA dudes, because someone there called them that. They're essentially just Western chauvinists. West is best, white is right. We didn't do anything wrong, and they were there to yell at parents as they were leaving. with their kids from the event. They were saying you should be ashamed of yourselves. You should be a better father. So what we did is we stood in front of them and we cleared the sidewalk. We made the big use of the flag to make sure the sidewalk was clear, and we pushed them back so that they couldn't be close to the parents, screaming obscenities and stuff at them and their children. So that was another way that we interacted with the actors, and not necessarily an aggressive way. I will say the Save Canada boys were looking for a fight. They were looking for someone to turn around because they were throwing punches at our like backs and stuff behind the flags. It got a little nasty, and I got really nervous there that things were going to escalate because I felt myself getting frustrated. But thankfully, the community really responded, and as soon as I noticed the kids were coming out, I just said, "Hey, let's calm it all down. Kids are coming out. We'll talk afterwards." So at the end of the day, it's hard to tell from some of the footage, but it was a really effective use of just bodies without being violent.
Right. I mean, that does sound a little dicey there for a moment. They were throwing punches at your
And
back.
so essentially what was happening is right on the corner, for those familiar with Peterborough, right on the corner of Elmer and Simcoe is the corner of the library.
Yeah.
Parents were leaving from the library, and they had organized themselves in a like crowd right by that weird statue that they put out. So they're right
Right.
on the corner. And so we had stood there with their flags, and we had tried to get them off the sidewalk by just standing in front of them and then asking them to back up so the kids could leave. They kept pushing us forward into the sidewalk and like
Mm.
throwing elbows and stuff, and then like pushing their weight against us and then pushing us forward. So anytime someone fell and then turned, like they were looking for a reaction so that
Yeah.
one of the counter protesters would fall, turn around, get really, really angry. And luckily, like, tensions were the highest at that point. Luckily, everyone was reminded by one person or another, completely decentralized, just being like, "Hey, let's focus on the kids right now." But yeah, it did. That was the closest to what I would worry we would see like U.S. style brawling, and that's what I
Okay.
worry about happening. Like that,
Yeah.
I can feel it coming.
Right. And I mean, thank you so much for telling us this. This is not something I saw in any of the many, many highly sensationalized videos surrounding the event. So,
Right. And what I will say about any of the drama that did happen is like I do think it's just a bit of a shame that the other actions that did take place from a lot of the folks who were targeted by who is that we did do a lot of other effective things that were really, really effective at protecting not just Betty but the kids and the parents and the counter protesters who showed up. That's the
right.
other thing, is we were there also to protect the counter protesters because
Yeah,
they were, they're coming from a marginalized community.
of course. And thank you so much for that work. I guess since we are talking a little bit about the drama, I was going to save it till the end, but since it's kind of
But
come up already,
natural
um
segue. Let's do it.
yeah, like so are you a deep state mole working with the anti-hate network to divide the left?
Yep.
Um you are?
Next question. Next
That makes
question.
sense.
Yep.
Um
No.
And so what is the anti-hate network, and how come they're being demonized so much by people like Karima and her supporters?
Um, I think. Okay, let me know if I'm going on too much of a tangent. I think within the last 10 or 15 years, we have seen the political spectrum shift very far to the right. Slowly but
Yeah.
surely, it has shifted very far to the right. So when someone on the left does something that stands out, it is labeled more and more as an extreme action. So we saw this in reaction, especially in the United States. Antifa all of a sudden just kind of bubbled up out of nowhere as this big boogeyman
Right.
who is smashing windows and is dressed in black, and they're kind of like
Yeah.
French protesters who are super scary.
Antifa,
And
those are the people who did the January 6th, right?
see, exactly, like it's this kind of narrative where it's like, oh,
Yeah.
all of a sudden anyone on the left, and as I'm sure most of your streamers are aware, Antifa is like loosely organized. Like it organized is a rough term to put to it. It is just essentially a collection of people who share a belief system, and are not necessarily connected through any political means, aren't building parallel governments and that kind of thing. So I think, in the last 15 years, we've seen this resentment toward the left build up in the States. And naturally, since we're right upstairs, we're going to get the same kind of thing. I know that there was the event in Toronto where Karima hosted Chris Sky, and that drew the attention of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. They published, I think, a couple of articles that detailed what happened and, the skirmishes and the issues that were brought up. And I don't think CAHN has talked about Karima specifically ever since. I'll make it very clear right now. I have written 2 articles for CAH, and
Oh my
I do
God.
not.
2 whole articles?
Two, I don't officially work for them. I got paid to write those articles. Don't get me wrong. I pitched them to them. That's how they do it. You can read their website, and that's how you do it.
Getting paid to
Um,
do journalism?
it's crazy,
What's going
right?
on?
So yes, I do have some connections to them, but like I'm not as what is like I think why Canadian Anti-Hate Network is like this big boogeyman right now for all this drama is because it's Canada's Antifa. It's
I see.
Cantifa, if I may. You know,
Cantifa. Wow.
right? Like it's because it's an actual organization. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Every other Antifa is you can't. It's really hard to pinpoint it. It's like there's not a board of directors. There's not this kind of thing. I think liberal hatred of the left in particular, because I don't see as much hatred from the far right folks that were really concerned. I see a lot of liberal hate in particular towards what they see as the manifestation of Antifa in Canada, which is the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, because they receive
I
government
see.
funding to do what they do and therefore have to have a board of directors and all that stuff.
Right. Okay. So that honestly, that is such a great way to put it. Is that it's like it is a more tangible manifestation of what people think Antifa is, right? And so it's really hard to say, "Oh my God, Antifa," and then you say like, "Well, where?" And they're nowhere to be found. But then if you say the AHN or whatever, anti-hate network, and then suddenly people have a place to direct that rage. So
Right.
so yeah,
Right.
thank you so
So
much
in
for clarifying
No,
that.
the last thing I will add is I just like in because I know you brought me on to talk a bit about activism, and just in general, I think this highlights a lot of really interesting questions. And what I would say is like what Canadian Anti-Hate Network does. I think they do amazing work. That's why I contribute to them. But I think it risks. This is what happens when the anti-fascism gets incorporated into the state. You
Hmm.
therefore have to have a board of directors. You therefore are reliant on government funding to do all these things, and therefore you become such an easy target for the good work that you're doing. It becomes so much easier to demonize you, and I think that's one of the like benefits of Antifa generally is this like loosely structured decentralized movement, but it raises
Right.
questions of like incorporating activism into the state.
True. And I mean, you know, it's not like all of these conservative outlets or even far right outlets, like some of them are also receiving government funding, is my understanding. Like I know that Epoch Times or Epic Times or whatever, I'm pretty sure they receive government funding and they very clearly have a far right agenda,
Yeah.
right? So, and I mean, I don't direct that much of my energy fighting them because I completely disagree with them. So I don't know. It's just it is strange, and I totally agree with you. Like having a decentralized network, it does have its advantages, right? Um, so moving on, can you tell us maybe a more from an academic perspective, like about the history of the far right in Canada?
Yes, the far right in Canada is a really interesting beast to tackle academically because typically in Canada is neglected when it comes to all things nasty, whether it's fascist studies, genocide studies, that kind of thing. So
Okay.
because there's two reasons. There's a couple of reasons for that. It's because there's a prevailing myth in Canada that we were the peaceful ones in comparison to the United States. Like there's that prevailing myth, and it's so the far right in Canada is able to tap into what I think they're able to do. What I think is really interesting about the far right in Canada that we're seeing really manifest now is they're able to tap into these like unexamined beliefs that we have about like whiteness on land and stuff. So we see this like some of the biggest manifestations of what we would recognize as the far right come before World War II. So you have Julian Arcan in Quebec, who organized the official Nazi Party of Canada, and was actually quite popular in Quebec and did very similar tactics that we see. He posted a bunch of newsletters in Quebec just arguing against immigration and against the government and why is the economy going to crap, and then slowly started to point towards the Jewish people in Canada and other immigrants being the problem for that. And so that's clearly the slow slide. And thankfully, once Canada joined the war, a lot of these Nazis who were posting publicly were thrown in jail under the War Measures Act. That's a whole
Mm.
different conversation about whether or not how we justify throwing people in prison and whether or not we should. But so a lot of the far right was really quashed at the end of World War II, at least in what we would understand as the far right, in terms of these organized like white folks in groups, like, you know, shit posting either in public or online. And then throughout the 70s and 80s, we see like Heritage Front is a big group that starts to emerge, and this is a white supremacist group. And we see a lot of ties to United States white supremacy movements, such as what's their name? I will come up with their name later. But so throughout the 70s and 80s, you start to see this resurgence of the far right. In the 90s, you see a lot of far right activity, especially in Canada. That's where Heritage Front really takes off. And that's where you start to see, especially the far right activists taking to the internet and realizing that the internet is a powerful, powerful tool. And then in the early 2000s, there is some really interesting, what I'm trying to trace in some of my work right now is the connections between the government's decisions on the Indian residential schools settlement, how that affected people's beliefs about what Canada is, and what stemmed from the IRSS. If people don't know what that is, it's essentially after residential schools closed, there was a bunch of lawsuits coming at the government because, as we're unfortunately continuing to find out, genocide was perpetrated on all levels within and without those schools. So to settle all these lawsuits, the government launched essentially a settlement program in which former survivors could get some compensation. Out of that, we get the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which details the horrific violence that students experience there. From the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we get 94 calls to action, one of which is that before resource extraction goes through, you need free, informed, and prior consent from the Indigenous nations who are going to be affected there. So in the early 2000s, all of this is happening. And then the Trudeau government comes in and passes legislation that is against Islamophobia and is against or is in favor of supporting Indigenous rights to free, informed, prior consent. And that's where we get United We Roll. So this was the first original instantiation as what would become the Convoy to Ottawa. This was a coalescing of oil and gas workers who were very frustrated and concerned, justifiably, about what's coming next for them after the green transition. You also have a bunch of folks who are really angry at, the increased immigration of Muslim folks and stuff. And Islamophobia in Canada is still very, very prominent. These folks coalesced. They made their way down to Ottawa, and they sat in Ottawa in all their trucks and honked their horns for 2 days, and then they left. And then, as we all know, a year ago, we see the same thing happening with these same kind of actors. And it is Canada's far right. It's really hard to pin down because I'm sure a lot of the dialogue you hear about it, especially the Convoy, is like, well, it's really unfair to call each individual member of the Convoy a far right activist. But this is how far right movements work. This is how they click on these individual concerns, and they give you one big reason that focuses all that attention. So it's the same with the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. They're doing amazing work revealing identities of really, really dangerous people to ensure that they can't affect our society. Yeah. And there's all these other things that they're doing. And it is just this weird coalescing that the far right in Canada that I think really draws on colonial ideas at the end of the day. That's the end of it for now.
All right. No, that's honestly, that's a wonderful what do you want to call it? Cole's notes about that. So I mean, personally, I'm not that familiar with it, so it's great to hear you shed some light on that situation. We are literally coming up to like the 1-year anniversary, or is it even today? I don't know.
What's the date today?
January 26th.
Oh yeah, I think this is when they showed up. I think that was the Friday, which is because it technically or that was the Thursday. I think I could be wrong. I love to spout it, but yeah, because they showed up on the Thursday. They were supposed to start on the Saturday, but it really started on the Thursday.
All right, people in chat are saying the 28th, which is coming this Saturday. So
2 more days.
Here I thought I was a scheduling master, and then I had purposely booked this interview with you on the anniversary of the Convoy.
But, you definitely did. I'm already starting to see headlines come out, about 1 year later and all this stuff. So
that's right. And so what do you have any expectation of what we're gonna see with this 1 year anniversary in Ottawa?
Yes, I do. I think we're already seeing some of it. I don't know how familiar everyone is with like the actual ins and outs of the organizers of the protest and stuff. As far as it seems right now, like there's too much infighting between them because it was going to be in Ottawa and then they're going to move it to Winnipeg, but since they can't get along, it's not going to be in Winnipeg. So now they're organized, like the Coots people are organizing their own anniversary. It's just like trying to book a family reunion with a bunch of people you don't like. I don't
I
think they
see.
have the same like energy and like momentum to coalesce them in the same way. However, that's the positive part. However, I think we're already seeing the consequences of it 1 year later. I don't know if you've been following what's been going on with the liberal retreat in Hamilton. Um,
A little bit. Is this the fireworks in Hamilton thing
yeah,
that's happening?
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
yeah. So essentially, the liberals are all the ministers and Justin Trudeau are in Hamilton right now to do a 3 day retreat. Which like no shame on Hamilton, but I'd pick a different city. Anyway, uh, um,
I'm glad it's
so
not Peterborough though. I have to
yeah,
say, we
right.
don't we
Oh
don't need
well,
the attention.
and this is why though, because even in Hamilton, it's drawn a lot of these far right convoy folks, and every night as like these government officials, the prime minister himself is walking to and from the conference room, the restaurants they're going to, there's like 150 200 people following them, screaming obscenities at them. Like the secret service is there, the RCMP is there, like, so I think we're already starting to see the reverberations of it. It's not going to be again, I think we have a tendency as a liberal society to look for that one big moment where everything coalesces
Hmm.
and fail to recognize all these little pieces that lead to it. And especially it's dangerous when it doesn't coalesce in that big moment. So when
Right.
it doesn't coalesce in Winnipeg or Ottawa this year, people are going to be like, okay, it's done. But for me, I don't think we can see the attacks, the ongoing attacks on public officials in public as unrelated to the symbolic attack on public officials by occupying, their workspace.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's great to keep in mind because in my head I have kind of been like, oh, the convoy is going to be a flop this year, and maybe even downplaying like the threat, right? But you're right. It very much is like an active thing, and even if it's not going to make headlines the way it did last year, it's something that we still need to be aware of.
Right.
So
The thing is, they're still angry, if not just as even more angry. And they're finding different places to take that anger out. And I think Drag Story Time is a symbolic example of that.
right, yeah, completely unrelated to everything they were upset about last year about the convoy, and vaccines and the pandemic. Um, so are there other symptoms that you've find of beyond drag story time and maybe these liberal retreats? Liberal retreats, it sounds horrible to to be fair. Like it sounds like
Just like, could you imagine how boring it would be to be in
yeah,
one of those rooms? Anyway, yes, I think internationally it's like clear. There is just this larger shift to the right. I
yeah,
think also what we're seeing on a political level, what I'm worried about is the collapse that we're seeing between premiers and the prime minister's office. Healthcare really sums this up.
right.
There is this bouncing back and forth of accountability. The premier say we want the money, Trudeau says we're only going to give you the money with strings attached, and they're just passing the buck back and forth. So what I worry about is someone who's really really smart, really really charismatic, showing up and making some really interesting videos online talking about all these issues that really affect Canadians in a way that's very personable, almost in a coffee shop, or he's sitting on a beach or so. I worry that like Pierre Poilievre is a dangerous character. He's not
Mhm.
dangerous yet. Unless you're like absolutely terrified of the Conservatives, which I mean there are good reasons to be, but I do, I try to be fair. What the thing to watch out for, at least on that level, is when Poilievre starts attacking minorities, when he starts using his populism to find a scapegoat for Canada's problems. Right now, that's Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
If it's not Justin Trudeau, he needs another scapegoat. And then if it's not him, well, we see that with Bernier, right? We see him, very visibly targeting immigrants and marginalized folks as the issues with Canada. Poilievre is playing the same game, but without taking that extra step. So I'm not sure if he will. I just worry about the people he's inspiring who are willing to take that extra step.
Yeah. I see what you mean. And I mean there is a bit of a a disconnection because he's like blaming Trudeau and everything Trudeau represents to a lot of people, and saying like these are the problems. But then if he were to assume power as prime minister and Trudeau is no longer a scapegoat, then what does he do? What does he say?
Right.
Right?
And I can see even Justin Trudeau, potentially this is stepping down, like stepping away from the next leadership, from the next election. And then let's say we have, a woman of color, a trans woman of color who is the leader of the Liberal Party. I mean, like, could you imagine?
I
Anyway,
would be pretty surprised by that, to be
yeah,
honest.
yeah,
But okay,
in
yeah,
this hypothetical, then you're going to start to see, I would, from the Conservative Party, maybe not from Pierre himself, but from the Conservative Party, you'll see the old racism and queer phobia come out.
yeah, yeah. Now we have covered PP a little bit on stream as of late, and he does seem to have changed his tune. It seems like suddenly he's willing to play ball with the media, and he's doing performative things like celebrating Lunar New Year in Vancouver, dressed in a traditional Chinese shirt. So, do you have any sense of like why this is happening?
He's good. This is what he's been doing his entire life.
Yeah,
He is good, and I think he's not 2015 Justin Trudeau campaign. That's the other thing. They thought that they had harnessed the power of social media in 2015. Remember all those headlines about Jagmeet Singh is taking over TikTok, so he's going to rule the country. So
right,
what I think is different about Pierre Poilievre is that he's harnessed the power of social media that the right is very good at harnessing, like the Joe Rogan
yeah,
rage machine. Like he's been able to tap into that in a way that leftist politicians will never ever be able to tap into. They can only
right,
tap into the everything is good, like we're fighting for so he's able to tap into this, what is a very viscerally emotional, action driven group of supporters. And the way you do that is, it's like, as it's 2023, you have to, celebrate Lunar New Year. I'm not saying he's being totally disingenuous. I think he does have some value to him as a human being. But I do think he is also playing with a very smart and different campaign team than we've seen before, which is, we're post TikTok now. We're
yeah.
but I mean,
We're living in a post TikTok society,
Andrew
I
Tate
guess.
was the most famous person in the world because of he was able to tap into that rage machine.
Yeah,
And that rage machine has all of the money and all of the energy in the world. And
right.
that's where I see some danger coming out.
Okay, yeah. And I mean, like let's take a moment to and like talk about what the left is failing at, and like how come the left can't tap into that machine. We're all using the same apps, fighting the same battle on the same fronts. How come the left can't do what Pierre Poilievre is doing, or Andrew Tate, or Jordan Peterson, or whatever?
So I think the left is caught in an interesting trap right now. And I'm trying to remember, because this isn't my original idea, but I remember I read it from I think it was from Alexandra Stern, who is an American philosopher and political thinker. She really laid it out in a way that really made sense to me. So we have your neoliberals who control the power. We have our Trudeaus, our Jagmeets, our Pierres. They're the
Yeah,
ones who really have the power. And then we have some on the left, and let's be honest, like let's not be too pessimistic, even though I'm a dedicated pessimist. The left has made some really great changes in the left. We did get a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Like, we are getting progress on gender equality and queer rights, and so then the government in the middle, the neoliberals, have to be like, okay, so we're going to incorporate some of that because some of our base comes from the left. So we're going to incorporate some of this wokeness into our messaging. We're going to incorporate the rainbow flag. And then the right sees the people in power as not what they actually are, which are the neoliberals who are like co-opting what the left wants in order to maintain power.
yeah,
The people on the right see the people in the middle as the left.
right.
So we just get swept in with all of this other neoliberal stuff. So where I think the left is failing right now, and I think Spain pre-World War II is the Republic of Spain is a really good example of how the left was able to mobilize itself as a popular front. And I think that's a term I think we should be really pushing out there on the left as a narrative. In just that, I'm just going to say it over and over again: popular front, popular front. Do your research, look it up. What does it mean? Essentially, it just means a bunch of different leftists coming together. So instead of your anarchists and your socialists and your communists and liberals all fighting each other because we don't agree on healthcare, we all come together and we put someone in power who's going to work on those things specifically without giving concessions to the right. So you saw that in Spain. And then unfortunately, what happened, the risk of doing a popular front in the left is you're going to get a vicious, violent reaction from the right. So, but what the left needs to do is to tap into populism, to tap into the very real anger that liberals want to refuse. Enough of Justin Trudeau being like, I understand that it's hard right now. I want Jagmeet Singh or someone much more courageous than him to go out there and say, I know you're angry, so I'm going to do something for you.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think that's the sentiment that we always get when every time Jagmeet Singh drops a new tweet or video where he actually now looks like a podcaster and tells us that he's going to pay your landlord's energy bill. It's like we want someone to be leading the charge and channeling the anger. But I guess maybe making TikTok videos is all the most we can ask for at this point.
Right. And like, I think a great example is like telecoms right now. Like Rogers is merging with Shaw. It's like the biggest merger. And it's like, and Rogers went out last year. We all couldn't pay for groceries because Rogers went down. And
Yeah.
Jagmeet put out a tweet this morning saying we need to stop this merger because we need more competition.
Right.
Why instead isn't he calling for the nationalization of a telecom industry? That's the real left. That's the real left. We should be nationalizing these things.
That's right. I mean that right there, it tells you that he's a neoliberal and not a socialist, right? So as a real leftist or whatever, I guess that's a loaded term too, a real leftist, but not someone who is co-opting the left and using it for their political motives. Like you that's the language that you want to hear. And because that's what's going to create the systemic change that needs to be done. So yeah, I really appreciate you saying all of that stuff. So where do you think our energy needs to be then, right? Because like we can only spend so much time fighting the far right, and by fighting them, we don't actually get the change that we want to see, but we do harm reduction in so much that society is not going to get worse. So where do you think that for us on the left, where do you think our energy needs to be right now?
On the left, I think we need to be taking a look at beyond Martin Luther King. And don't get me wrong, Martin Luther King, I'm not talking about the liberalized version of Martin Luther King. I recognize that Martin Luther King also called for the radical distribution of wealth. I think we need to be thinking more radically and more locally. I think we get too caught up. I think it is too easy to get caught up on a national level. It's too easy to worry about the coming of a fascist state with the rise of conservatism at the federal level, where I think you are going to both see the most progress in and have a good time is like taking care of your community. And I think like drag story time is like a great example of that. Everyone who showed up there did an amazing job at keeping the kids safe. Everyone seemed to have fun for the most part, except for the people who showed up to yell at us about it. It like everyone had fun, and we did an amazing thing in our community. And we let the greater Peterborough community and Ontario and Canada know that Peterborough is not a place where you can just waltz in and you spew this bullshit. It is a place, so taking local active changes will make you feel better. It will prevent burnout if you are focused on your local community. It is important not to forget everything else that's going on. Obviously, the war in Ukraine, there's so much. And it is like, it's almost a reused trope on the left right now where it's like, oh, it's like they throw all this big stuff at you, man, so you can't help yourself. But honestly, one of the most successful things the Black Panthers ever did was replace people's brake lights, because Black people were way more likely to be pulled over because of a broken tail light and then face criminalization and incarceration because of that. So it's these local things that will really build a sense of community and solidarity, so that when things do get better, we have a voice to push for even more change. And then if things get worse, we have a community we can rely on. So we're not all just these isolated individuals trying to deal with all of these collective problems as individuals. You need to know that there's people in your community that you can rely on when, even when, you know, the Dericho hit Peterborough. Well, what I love to see is that it took, you know, Hydro One ages to get out, but people were fine. People were feeding each other. People were making sure that, you know, opening their fridges, their freezers, having communal barbecues. It's this kind of mutual aid and localized, decentralized activism that I think is fundamentally important to maintaining not only yourself, but actually seeing like productive change in the world. Because that will trickle up. Screw Ronald Reagan. It trickles up.
All right, I think that's a great way to kind of like bring this conversation full circle. So thank you so much, Collin Chepeka. Make sure I'm saying that right. For
Thank you.
coming on the show and lending us your academic expertise. And
Anytime. More than happy to come back. Thanks so much for having me, though. It was nice to be able to finally speak a little publicly.
yeah, yeah. Honestly, we would love to have you back. And
Sweet.
again, thank you so much, chat. Thanks you, and I hope you have a great rest of this wonderful snowy day.
Thank you. You too. Stay safe.
All right, peace.